Hello everyone, my name is Shannon Way and I am so thankful to be able to be here today to talk to you all a little bit about foundation paper piecing and hopefully taking some of the fear out of foundation paper piecing. We're going to take a look at a very simple block that is normally traditionally pieced, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I will take a block like that, a traditional block that's been done forever and ever, and turn it into a FPP project, something that makes sense to my brain. This block is one, there we go, is one that when I looked at it, I thought maybe those pieces might be a little fiddly for me. And I think that switching it to a foundation paper piece project would make it easier for me. So the block is called Whirlwind, and I actually took this block card out of, they are called, you might see the one over my shoulder here, the Quilt Builder card deck. And this is from box 1, and it's called Whirlwind. And you'll see it's actually 4 sections of 4 of the same block done over and over, 4 times, spun around to create this pinwheel, which for me then makes it very easy to do in FPP. I say very easy only because I've done it before, but easier to do with FPP because we're only looking at these 4 pieces of fabric put together in one smaller block to make up the larger block. So I will talk a little bit today about how I went from taking a look at this, something that I wouldn't do because of these tiny triangles and trying to get them precise. Traditional piecing would drive me insane. So how I go from this, looking at this, to this as a closer to finished project. And after the video, when I'm back live, I'll show you what I've done with this. But let's dig into how I take a look at these things and really get ready to more bulk sew for items like this than cutting for each individual piece for something a little more intricate like a legit kit or something. So when they are traditional blocks like this with not odd shapes, weird slivers of triangles and things of that nature, this completely lends itself to cutting your fabric in bulk and having everything set up before you sit down to sew. So that's what we're going to take a look at. And I'm going to use an overhead camera, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to make sure that we are good to go. So again, I started with this card, and I moved from this to sketching it out on a piece of paper. To be honest, I could go from this, go up to my copier, size this up, size it down. However, I wanted to have a finished size block and actually just go right from this paper. And that would be perfectly acceptable. If I wasn't looking at a inspiration block and I just drew something, that might be something that I've done or I would do. I did something very similar for the little pillow you see behind me for Millie. I drew her out. I just cut up the picture that I drew and just started figuring out how I wanted to lay out the pieces where I thought it would all line up. It's a little bit easier for more geometric, simpler shapes than it was for her. So you could literally go straight from your notebook. You could take it to any kind of software you may have. If you have Adobe Illustrator, or you have Procreate on your iPad, or you have EQ8 for quilting. And I also went ahead and did that. I brought that same concept to EQ8 and printed out more pieces. And then I will show you how I get started, what sewing the fabrics on will look like, and how I take care of putting the pieces together as we move through demystifying the whole process. I think the largest fear factor is making sure that you're lining up your fabrics correctly. And I think one way to take a little bit of that fear out of the process is to measure beforehand and cut in bulk. So that's what we're going to take a look at. So for my block here, my block from the seam allowance to seam allowance is 4.5 inches, top to bottom and left to right, 4.5 inches, 4.5 inch square. When I think about cutting out these individual fabrics, I will look at each individual part. This square is A1. You always start with 1, whichever block you're on, whichever section you're on. A1, Z1, or Z1. However they lay it out, that first piece, that's where you'll always start. So we'll start measuring that. And in here, this block is, the little square in here is 2.25 from seam allowance to the edge, but don't fall into the trap of just thinking you just need to go to the edge of the square, because you need seam allowance on the other side to be able to bring the, what is the word I'm looking for? The next piece of fabric on. You need the seam allowance to attach to. So you'll need not 2.25, but at least 2.5. And for me, I would actually go, especially as a new person trying to tackle FPP, I would go even higher, up to 3 inches, just to make sure I have everything covered. A 3-inch square is what I would cut in this sandy color. So I think I have some scraps over here. Let's see, what do I have? This is 3 inches. This is pretty close to 3 inches. It's a little shy on this side. It's more rectangular than it is square, but I think this will be good to use to show that it covers the square. I don't know if you can see the sew lines through the fabric, but this definitely covers all the way around where we're going to be sewing the next pieces on. So I'm comfortable with that being piece 1. With FPP, you are always looking at everything mirror image, upside down, very topsy-turvy. So that takes a little while, and give yourself time and give yourself grace. It takes a little while to understand that, because we're looking at a piece of paper, and as we're reading or we're using paper where the print is, we consider that right side up in our heads. And it's hard to train yourself that that is not the case in FPP. This is actually what you would be looking at of wrong side up for a traditional block. It would be this would be where the seams are and all of the stuff that you hide in the batting. This would be the not so pretty side. And in FPP, actually this side is the right side up. This is the pretty side up. So that's going to be a piece of what you're going to need to train your brain to understand as you're doing foundation paper piecing, that you are doing it upside down, and you are looking at it mirror image. So when we lay out our first piece of fabric, especially just starting out, solids and batiks are a great way to start in FPP. No directional fabric, no right side or wrong side to worry about. These are an FPPer's best friend when you're just starting out, because the first piece of every section, that first one, A1, B1, C1, is always wrong side up when you're looking at the sewing lines, right side up in that mirror image of what will be the right side of the finished project. And that is hard, again, to wrap your head around. So you just have to give yourself a little added buffer by starting off with solids or batiks. It helps out tremendously. And once you've gotten the muscle memory down of lining up piece one, lining up the next pieces to sew on, and that's all under your belt, then you can start graduating to directional fabrics and printed fabrics and have no fear to do that. But you want to start out and give yourself a little bit of extra wiggle room. Start off with solids and batiks. So that's how I would measure for the square. And then depending on what size my project was going to be, I would cut out however many squares I would need. For the finished block, it's a 4-section block. So I know I need 4. And then how many blocks do I want to make? With the little project that I showed you, it's 4 different blocks. So I would need 16 of these squares to complete the whole thing. And I know that the size of the square isn't going to change within those 16. So I need 16 3-inch squares. And I know that I have all of my fabric cut out and ready to go. And it's the same color throughout the entire project. So I don't even have to worry about dividing for color, different colors. Boom, 16, have those done and ready for you. These inner ones are these black triangles. So what is nice is that we know that the edge of the triangle is the same size as the square that we just looked at. So it's 2.5 for the seam allowance all the way around. But because it's 2 triangles of the same color, I can cut a square. Now, because I'm going to cut the square in half, I would probably cut a larger square. I would cut like a 3.5-inch square to make sure that I have enough room for both triangles, just to make sure to give myself peace of mind. When you're just starting off in FPP, you don't have to start with the exact size piece. And I think that is also where a lot of fear lies, that you don't know exactly how to cut the exact size piece, and you don't have to. You don't have to start off. You are working as a sculptor in fabric to sculpt each piece down to the finished size, which means you're not starting off with the finished size. You are adding fabric, and by adding layers of fabric, you're taking away and shaping that final piece into the size that it needs to be. But that doesn't mean you start off that way, because you need to have the room to shape it down to the size it needs to be. So always give yourself some extra room. So we did a 3-inch square, and to remain square, I know that I'm going to make this into 2 triangles. I feel 3.5 inches makes that a little bit easier and ensures that I'm going to have the coverage and I won't have to tear out. In FPP, you're sewing with a shorter stitch length, generally 1.3 to 1.7. So tearing a stitch length out that tiny is no fun. So I don't recommend it. Just give yourself some extra grace. The amount of fabric that you will quote unquote waste, I don't feel is a waste when you are guaranteeing your state of mind to not be a crazed lunatic trying to get out those tiny stitches, and that you're not frustrating yourself time and time again. You are learning a new skill, and when you're learning a new skill, mistakes are going to be made and fabric's going to be wasted. And that's no different than anything I've ever done in traditional piecing either. If it was a new technique, I've wasted some fabric. So give yourself the grace. So we're going to start off with a 3-inch square, and this is obviously much bigger, so I'm going to trim this down. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I think I said 3.5. So 1, 2, 3.5. Start off with a 3.5-inch square, and then I will cut that square in half for the triangles that I need. 1, 2, 3. Because we're going a little bit extra, if it's a little wonky on one side, I wouldn't worry about that one too much. But that is our square, and then we can cut it in half into the 2 pieces. So we need 2 of these triangles for each section, 4 sections for an individual block. So that's 8 for the individual block, and then times however many you need for your finished project. All right, so let's move on to the larger triangle now. This large piece here. So let's see, oh, we did blue, let's do purple. So the purple, okay, so my rough cut of just getting fabric ready is already a nice size, good size to be taken care of for the block that we're doing. But I'll go ahead and measure it out and show you what, I will probably just leave it in the rough cut because why not, it's worked. But I'll show you what I would do the measurements too. So we know that the block itself is 4.5 from seam allowance to seam allowance. And I would then make the square, because we're going to be cutting the square in half, and make sure that we have enough to go all the way across. I would make the block 5.5 inches. I mean, the square 5.5 inches of the fabric. So let's see about where we're at. Where are we at? 1, 2, 3, 5, and almost a half. I'm calling that good. So for that larger one, this is the one that we're going to have all different colors. So pink, blue, green, and purple. So you will have 1 triangle of each color, 4 total for each of the blocks. So then you would figure out the math on the however large a project that you want to do, and cut out in bulk from there. For the 4 block project I did, obviously you're gonna need 4 purple, 4 pink, 4 blue, 4 green. And so that would mean you would need 2 5.5 inch squares cut in half to have your fabric ready for your paper. And we are here. I always have these on hand. These are just the cardboard mailers. I'm sure you all get them with many different projects and mailings. I just have those on hand. You can use your add a quarter ruler. I don't find that even the thinned down one, the Pro, I don't find that that is even as thin as I like. So I really like using the cardboard mailer, but up to you. So we're gonna line this up, and we've got at least a 1/4 inch, and we're good on, so this is where the seam allowance is. We're good there. This is where the seam allowance is. We're good here. So we know we have enough fabric there to cover. So I'm comfortable with the size triangle I get from cutting the 5.5 inch square. And that means we are set and ready to go. Now, I'll just go ahead and fold the rest of the paper. For me, I like to ensure that my 1/4 inch seam allowance, for the most part, there are some situations where you have a piece of fabric that is bigger than what you're using or what you need, because you want to make sure that you're covered. And so, and there may be some angles involved. And so you're going to have more fabric, and that's a special situation. In these cases, with these more simplified geometric shapes, you're not going to have to worry about weird angles. So what I always try to do is line up, again, piece of fabric number 1 is always wrong side up if you're looking at it from the sew line, right side up if you're looking at it from the back. And I'm going to be sewing fabric 2A2 to A1. So I will take this, and because we're mirror image, excuse me, upside down, I'm going to take the paper, I'm going to fold on the sew line that we're going to be doing, sewing fabric 2 to fabric 1, and I'm going to make sure that my seam allowance is already there. I already have that 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is going to make lining up fabric 2 so much easier against fabric 1, and then to help ensure that fabric 2 is giving us the coverage that we need. So we've got it lined up the 1/4 inch. The fabric is going past the seam. I don't know if you can see the sew line right here, but the sew line is right here, diagonal across. The fabric is well past on this side. The fabric is well past on this side. So I know, and this is where being angly challenged, my brain could not process if I was looking at this with the paper this way, or if I was looking at it with the paper upside down. I could not, for the life of me, for whatever reason, figure out how to lay this piece of fabric. I would just do it wrong every single time. I would lay it the incorrect way, and when I would fold it back, it would be going this way. I would have it ended up like this, and I would be so frustrated because it just didn't work for my brain. At some point, somewhere in YouTube land, someone showed, and didn't even really talk about it, it was just the way they did it, showed that they line up their fabric this way, and when you are looking at the mirror image, you can see the fabric is opposite of what it's supposed to be. That's not going to cover what I need. If I'm looking at it this way with the paper folded over, so I'm looking at the mirror image, the backwards, the topsy-turvy, upside down view, I can make sure that I have my fabric in place in the right area with the right coverage to be confident each and every time when I flip this paper over, open to sew, and then flip this piece of fabric over to press it, that I am going to have the coverage I need. And I think that is one of the biggest mysteries of foundation paper piecing. And I have found when I've shared that with folks, a light bulb goes off and it works for them too. So now I'm going to sew against this line. I start outside of the seam allowance. I will take a few stitches. So I'll start outside the seam allowance. I'll take a few stitches into the area of the other fabric that I will end up eventually sewing on, because I know now, because I've sewn past that and the fabric is going to be caught in that area, that when I sew on this last piece, the join is going to be super crisp. What I found I was having a problem with was when I stopped, and when I was trying to stop right at where you're supposed to stop, sometimes when I folded the fabric back over, there would be the tiniest of gaps where it didn't catch all of it together to make that join, to make that T shape basically. And that drove me crazy, and I hated tearing it out. And so I've found going a few stitches over, when I pull this back, you just pull the paper a little bit back, and then because of your small stitch length, your stitches are just fine. And this area is super clean when I add on that fourth piece of fabric. So we repeat for piece 3. Now we're sewing fabric 3 to fabric 1. I'll go ahead and again show you, because I like to start off with the 1/4 inch seam, and then I don't have to trim after I've sewn and pressed. I can just move right on. So it's kind of half dozen, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's kind of just taking care of it at one time. But the reason, at the beginning, I take care of it. But the reason I do that is to ensure that when I'm aligning my fabrics, they're in the right place. So that 1/4 inch is done. I'm not gonna iron. I'm going to just finger press for right now. So we can just keep going. But you wanna make sure that you get into the muscle memory of align your fabrics, sew your sew line, flip your fabric back, and press. So align, sew, flip, and press. And if you keep that in mind, if somebody has a little song they want to write for it, please let me know. But if you keep that in mind and you just do the same movements over and over and over again, you will always remember to flip your fabric over so you're not sewing on the next piece with the fabric over here, which you would have to take it apart. But you wouldn't have to take the whole thing apart. You would just have to open it up a little bit and then flip it over. Not the worst thing in the world, but save some time. Don't do it in the first place. When you start getting that muscle memory, you'll just remember, and it'll feel different. It'll feel weird, and you'll know that you need to stop. So we've got our 1/4 inch seam allowance. We are ready to add the next piece. Again, looking at the mirror image, making sure my fabric is covering. This is the sew line, so I know I'm over down here. This is the sew line, I know I'm over down here. I'm ready to add this to the paper. I will start out in the seam allowance. Again, sewing into the next section just to make sure that we are comfortable, that when I add on the purple, I will join in a crisp, clean little cross section right there. Now I will flip this back. Again, just finger pressing for time's sake, for video's sake. I would absolutely be using my Easy Press pen. Not going to go into tools today, but I use the Easy Press pen for traditional piecing and for FPP all the time. It's just my go-to. So there we go. Now we've got the flying nun. And I will fold this back and we'll trim up again to the 1/4 inch so that I'm ready to sew on purple. There we go. All pieces off. Grab our purple. Line up on the seam allowance that we have created by already having the fabric trimmed. I've got into the seam allowance. Black fabric is making it harder to see down on this end because we're over, but let me spin it around this way. You can see it goes past the paper, so we're good to go. Try to fold it on the seam allowance. So you see it's past the seam allowance, so we're golden there too. That's what it looks like on this side. I don't tend to worry about ironing so much because we iron so much during FPP that will be taken care of. Comfortable with that coverage. Now we'll sew this on, taking definite care when I get to the point where all of the fabrics meet at that one section, that I'm making sure that I'm on the line so that I keep my point. Just as important in FPP as in traditional piecing. Perfect points. So there we have it. We're gonna fold this back. And we've got our preserved point right here. Looks great. Again, just gonna finger press. This cherry wood fabric presses so beautifully. Finger press, iron, it's fantastic. Love this fabric to work with. So there we go. Go ahead and trim it. I always, another tip to help you is when I'm trimming, I always make sure that I am trimming with the 1/4 inch lined up on the inner sew line, not just taking the pattern for granted that that's a 1/4 inch and just going, you know, at the 1/4 inch of the seam allowance from the pattern, because as we're ironing, as we're using things like easy press pens, the paper can wrinkle, can crinkle, and it may not be a true 1/4 inch any longer by the time we're trimming the block. And I want to avoid having the blocks not match up and all the seam allowances not match up and the sew lines not match up. So if you are always doing it this way, your 1/4 inch on the sew line that you'll be sewing, doesn't matter what the paper has done, you will always set yourself up for success in the sewing of the pieces together, because your 1/4 inch is always going to be the same. And so then I also recommend using the same ruler every time, because sometimes rulers can be off microscopically, but still off, and it'll drive you to distraction. So here we go. Here is our finished section. Putting the pieces together, you're going to go right sides to right sides. You'll put them together so that your sew lines are visible. You would sew across this sew line. And then when I am building these pieces, I will take out, show you on this completed section, I will take the paper out of the seam allowance to reduce the bulk within the seam allowance here and here. But I leave the paper on because I'll be building and adding more pieces on, and I want to make sure that I have the same consistency of 1/4 inch seam allowance against that sew line. So I leave that paper on until I am ready to complete the project. And then I will do open seams depending, listen to your fabric. Your fabric talks to you, I swear. If there are a lot of pieces of fabric coming together on one side and not as much, or only one, like this larger triangle on the other side, your fabric may be adamant that it wants to go towards the less fabric, rather than folding this back and doubling up many more seams than is here. This is just fine for these number of seams. But open seams there, and you have those pieces. This, I would do the purple and then the green and add, there we go, to have the pinwheel and have something that looks like this. So there we have it. I want to thank you all again so much for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope you've learned a couple of things. No, I do not expect to convert everyone into the FPP lover that I am, but I do enjoy taking some of the fear out of foundation paper piecing, giving you another technique for your tool belt, your toolkit, so that if you do find yourself in a position that there's a sew along that you would like to join, you have at least the basics and some information to go back to so that you could participate in something that might strike your fancy. If you have any questions or concerns, there's a free pattern that goes along with this. And if you run into any issues, please reach out to me at slayarts@gmail.com. And you can find me at Slay Arts on YouTube, on Instagram, and on Facebook. All right. Thanks again so much. Bye now.